Good evening and welcome back. My name is Damian Jackson, and I am the poll mark of the Philadelphia Alumni Chapter of Kappa Alpha Psi Fraternity Incorporated. As many of you know, we had a forum similar to this back in the spring, and we called that part one of our gun violence and mental health program. There were so many questions and such robust information given out that we knew we had to come back for part two. So here we are, another evening where we are seeking out not only questions, but real solutions to help us with what we believe is a pandemic in our community, a pandemic of gun violence and mental health. And we have the heavy hitters here tonight to hopefully address those issues and start to come up with some real world solutions to help us all. I'd like to thank all of our panelists for taking the time out of their busy schedules, because obviously these people are heavy hitters and they have a lot on their plate, but they knew that this was important and decided to dedicate their time to getting this done. So we thank you in advance. I'd like to thank my team, three brothers in particular, Brother Zaire Coney, Brother Devin Allen, and Brother Luambe Domingos, who helped with the very heavy lifting of putting this program on and hopefully making myself and all the panelists look good at the same time. I'd like to thank my brothers and sisters of the Divine Nine organizations. Those would be Sigma Gamma Rho, the ladies of Zeta Phi Beta, the ladies of Alpha Kappa Alpha, the ladies of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, particularly Dr. Penny Nixon, who we have partnered with some other events on, as well as the brothers of Alpha Phi Alpha, Omega Psi Phi, Phi Beta Sigma, and Iota Phi Theta. This is an important forum, and you know, it was crystallized for me this afternoon because my best friend's mother contacted me to ask me how to register and to make sure that she got through that process so that she could be on this line tonight to hear this all important information. So Ms. Brown, I'm glad you called me and I'm glad that you're on to participate. As they said back when we were in school, let's put on our thinking caps and get down to work. I will now pass the mic to my brother, Attorney Michael Coard, Attorney Brother X. Thank you, listen up, and Godspeed, brothers.
Thank you very much, Brother Paul Mark. I'm hearing a slight echo. I don't know if you all hear that, but I'm just going to keep it moving. I'm good now, so if anybody does hear that echo, just put wave or yell or do something. But right now, it seems to be going very well. As I said at the outset, thank you very much, Brother Paul Mark Damian Jackson, for those introductory words. By the way, I'm sure you all heard him refer to me as Brother X. I am Michael Coard, Esquire, AKA Michael X, AKA the angriest Black man in America. And when I say angry, I mean angry in a constructive way, in the very same way that James Baldwin meant it when he said to be Black and conscious in America is to be in a constant state of rage. Not a destructive rage, but a productive and constructive, the kind of things that we're trying to do here now. This is part two of the Kappa Alpha Psi virtual gun violence and mental health forum. The first one took place back on May 27, and it was an overwhelming success. So we figured we had to do it a second time, and that second time is tonight. Now here's the plan, here's the agenda. The event goes from 7 p.m. until 8:30 p.m. And what we plan to do is from about, say, 7:15, I'm looking at the clock now at 7:05, let's say from about 7:10 until 8 p.m., we'll have comments and questions and statements from the panel. And then maybe around the last 25 minutes or so, from let's say 8 o'clock to 8:25, we'll get questions and comments from the audience that I will be relaying to the panelists. And then we'll have some closing comments at the very end. I'm going to start with the introduction of the panelists. And it's going to be a very brief introduction because if these panelists are anything like me, I hate it when I go to an event and somebody reads a 15-minute resume. That bores me. So if it bores me, I know it bores the audience. So I'm just going to cut to the chase. I'm going to do a brief interview of the panelists, and based on how they're listed on the flyer, I'll start one by one and have each of them give a 3-minute opening statement. In that opening statement, I want you to talk about crime. I want you to talk about mental health. And to the extent you think it's relevant, I want you to talk about race and class in your opening statement. And then once we get through the final opening statement, we'll go back and forth with questions. So let me start first with, as indicated on the flyer, District Attorney Larry Krasner. And again, I'm going to be very brief in connection with the introductions. He was elected in 2017, re-elected just recently, a noted civil rights attorney before he became an elected official, as well as a noted criminal defense attorney. I don't think he would mind if I said that he's one of the leading reform district attorneys in the country, one of the leading woke and enlightened district attorneys with a much different approach from the history of Philadelphia district attorneys. That's Larry Krasner. Next is Police Commissioner Danielle Outlaw, the first African-American woman to lead the Philadelphia Police Department, and not just a great law enforcement official, but also a scholar. I'm sure many of you heard about her TED Talk presentation, which went viral, and it was really profound. It was really scholarly and very well done. Prior to coming to Philadelphia, she was the chief of the Portland, Oregon's Bureau of Police and was the first African-American woman to hold that post. Commissioner Outlaw began her law enforcement career in Oakland. Next on our list, as indicated on the flyer, is Dr. Ingrid Tulloch. And I kind of misled you when I said that, because we initially had somebody else who, due to an emergency, a medical emergency, was unable to be here. But no disrespect to him, but the fact that we have somebody as esteemed as Dr. Ingrid Tulloch is really going to enhance what we're trying to do here. Dr. Tulloch earned her BA in psychology with special honors from Hunter College and a PhD in psychology at City University of New York. She was awarded a postdoctoral research fellowship to study addiction in molecular neuropsychiatry branch of the National Institute on Drug Abuse. When you talk about somebody who can tie in so-called criminality to mental health to drug addiction, this is the person we want. This is the person we have. And we're honored to have Dr. Ingrid Tulloch. Next on the flyer is Samson Stiles. And I guess I don't even really need to read his bio. He's a street guy. I mean, he was in and out of jail as a juvenile, in and out of jail as an adult. And I'm only mentioning this because he wears it on his sleeve. He lets you know what he went through and where he is now. One of the greatest filmmakers and documentarians in the United States of America, despite growing up the way he did in Brooklyn. He'll talk more about that, and we're honored to have him. Also on the panel is Atty. Luker. Atty. Luker is an education and outreach specialist with the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania's Office of the Attorney General, Office of Public Engagement. He's done extensive work as a legislative assistant with state government prior to becoming both a district director and community relations director with the U.S. House of Representatives. And by the way, big shout out to Attorney General Josh Shapiro, who dropped what he was doing the last time to be with us, but couldn't do that today. But that's okay, because we have Atty. Luker. And by the way, Anthony also has extensive work experience in the school district of Philadelphia, so he can tie in all of that. Finally, and when I say last but not least, Bilal Qayyum. And when I mention Bilal, I could just say he's a community activist. I could just say he's a civic leader. I could just say he's the president and executive director of the Father's Day Rally Committee, but that would be doing him a disservice. Anytime there's an issue regarding gun violence and gang violence and anything affecting the Black community, you can bet that Brother Bilal is somewhere in the mix. And we're glad to have him tonight on the panel as part of the mix. I notice the time is 7:10, so we're pretty much on track. We want to get things going. And in the very same way that I just introduced the panelists, I'm going to ask each of them to take 3 minutes just giving us an introductory statement. I know we do have one lawyer, maybe two lawyers, certainly one lawyer, two lawyers in the panel, District Attorney Larry Krasner and I, so we know what an opening statement is. An opening statement is where you tell the jury what you intend to prove. So we want all of you to play the role of attorney and tell us what you're going to be talking about tonight. And in your 3 minutes, I hope that one, you can tie in mental health to gun violence, but also, if you're willing, to tie in race and class. While we're doing that, and I'm acting like I'm really cool and composed now, but for some reason, I'm on my laptop and it's showing me that my battery is running low. And I charged up the damn thing since Tuesday of last week. Why my battery is running low, I have no idea. But professionals do what professionals do, so we're going to get it moving. So let's start with Larry Krasner with his 3-minute opening statement, and then we'll go to Police Commissioner Danielle Outlaw, and then to Dr. Ingrid Tulloch, followed by Samson Stiles, Anthony Luker, and we'll wrap up the opening statements with Brother Bilal. First up, District Attorney Larry Krasner with his 3 minutes.
Well, first of all, thank you, Mr. Coard. It's always an honor to have a chance to speak. I really enjoyed the forum last time. I don't come here with a ton of answers. I think an awful lot of us are looking for answers, but I want to tell you something that really struck me in a book I read, not because it's an answer, but because it's a fact. And I think it presents some interesting questions about mental health, about race, about gun violence that are coming up. And I also think I'm not qualified to talk about some of them, but maybe some of you are. So there is a scholar and an author named Paul Butler. Mr. Butler is an African-American man who is a professor of law at Georgetown. You see him pretty frequently on MSNBC as a commentator, wrote a couple of really interesting books, one called Chokehold, most of which I've finished. And Chokehold is named that for a specific reason, which is that Paul Butler is describing what it means to have a law enforcement system, to have policing of a certain type, so that it causes you or leads you to do things like fight back when you're in a chokehold. And that the fighting back against that system and the way it is affecting you then is criminalized as well. One of the things he talks about in a chapter is something I did not know, which is that the rate of suicide among white people is much higher than the rate of suicide among Black people. And the rate of homicide among Black people, at least when he wrote it, was higher than the rate of homicide among white people. I don't have an answer for you. I don't know exactly where that comes from. I can talk about being broke because I grew up broke. I grew up with food stamps, but I can talk to you about being white, but I can't talk to you about being Black. That is a striking fact, though, if you think about it for a minute, because it does go to mental health. We don't really criminalize suicide. We don't really criminalize white people shooting themselves in the head, because that's apparently what white people do a lot more than Black people. But we, obviously we do criminalize when Black people are killing each other with it, are killing each other in society, or killing other people within society. Like I said, I don't have an answer. There's so much we can talk about tonight. So much of it is important. But I think it touches on and points to a whole lot of structural issues and a whole lot of things that are going on. And I hope that some of you may have some comment on that and have some answers on that. And that is all I have at this time. Thank you.
Mr. Krasner, you were right on time. That was exactly 3 minutes. In fact, about 3-4 seconds under 3 minutes. We're going to keep things moving. By the way, I don't know if you all noticed that my battery did die, but I was able to do some fancy technological stuff, and here I am back. But we're going to keep things moving, keep the show rolling. Next up, Police Commissioner Danielle Outlaw with her 3-minute opening statement.
Good evening, and it is an honor to be back amongst this esteemed panel. I enjoyed the previous panel, and I too, I'm here to not only be a part as a panelist, but to listen and to hopefully hear some of the solutions that are driven by community. You mentioned intersectionality of race and class. I would also throw gender in there as it impacts gun violence, and then also mental health. I mean, if nothing else was learned in the last almost 2 years, or whenever the pandemic officially became the pandemic, is that, there's so many structural inequities as it relates to the systems that already exist, our infrastructures, inequities to access, all these things. And, as I'm out and about, listening to folks, when I do these walking tours, you know, I hear it time and time again. If I only had this, or I came across a woman in a wheelchair and said, you know what, I've been in jail for a total of 37 years of my life. And I said, wow, really? And I immediately thought to myself, I bet you I know what it was for. And next thing I knew, she said, and you know what it was for? And before I can answer, she said, it's because I was an addict. And because I was an addict, I didn't have access to housing. I had the hardest time getting into a PHA property, and it all spiraled from there. So, and then she went on to say, and that's why I said we got to add the gender piece of that. She said, we need more programs for women. It's not just focusing on reentry for some people, but for women and children, or with families and all these other things. So I think if anything, this discussion tonight will shed light on the fact that there has to be very serious conversation around alternative strategies to policing. Because when the police are brought in, we're typically called and brought in when people are at their worst. And so if we take the time to focus on how we are best deploying our resources, are the police the most appropriate response? And if the answer is no, are we willing to have that very difficult conversation and say, okay, if not them, then who, right? And does that allow us to put more police officers on the street, as we know people want to see, as opposed to me saying, look, our capacity isn't what it was a year ago, or even 3 years ago, or 5 years ago. I can't do it. We have to be very strategic with how we deploy. If we're very open to having this conversation and saying, look, calling the police are not the sole answer, I think we would get a little bit further in not just throwing stuff at the wall to see what sticks. I think we can really come to some meaningful solutions. So I'm looking forward again to the conversation this evening. And really hearing more about what happens if we focus more on trauma-informed care and alternative strategies to policing.
I guess Police Commissioner Outlaw and Larry Krasner must have a stopwatch, because they stop right before.
He does. I saw his.
The 3 minutes. That's really impressive. And let me just follow up on what Police Commissioner Outlaw said when she talked about gender. I didn't mention that in connection with the intersectionality, but I'm so glad she did. One of the things I want to get into, especially coming from the police commissioner and from the DA and from the Attorney General's office, what are we doing in connection with that? I'm going to discuss some of the cases I've been involved in, but I'm going to change the names and change some of the facts to protect the anonymity and confidentiality. But let me just say, I represented a young woman who had a protection from abuse order, whose ex-boyfriend broke into the house and who she shot and killed. And fortunately for us, the jury came back not guilty all charges. But my question was, why did the police even arrest her? Why did the DA even prosecute her? And again, I'm not putting anybody on the spot, but those are kind of things we want to get to, because if that happens again, an abused young Black woman with a PFA whose ex-boyfriend breaks into the house and she shoots him with his own gun, is there a policy that we have? Is there a procedure where we look into the background before we treat her like public enemy number one? That's the general thing. Some of the stuff I just mentioned is not specific to the case, because I don't want to get into that, but we want to talk about those real world issues. Having said that, let's next go to Dr. Ingrid Tulloch, and I'm going to provide Dr. Tulloch with her 3 minutes, and hopefully, like the commissioner, like the DA, will tie in race, will tie in class, will tie in mental health, and tie in anything else Dr. Tulloch wants to discuss. Your 3 minutes begins now, Doctor.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me here. I'm also looking forward to sharing and hearing from you all, because it's a give and take process. I learn as much as you learn, and I'm really looking forward to learning from everyone here. The thought that occurred to me when this panel and the idea of this panel was first presented to me was the phrase, trauma is violent and violence begets trauma. It is this very circular thing that feeds into each other. And so that led me to consider all of the students that I've worked with when I worked at Maryland Correctional Institute as a psychology instructor. A majority of the individuals there were African-American, Black. A lot of them came from lower socioeconomic status. and even the white ones that were there. And about 70% of them had substance abuse issues that were not addressed. Why? When I asked, well, what prompted you to first use a drug? And it was always, I wanted to numb the pain. And that immediately made me realize that these people are numbing pain. They're trying to run away from trauma. And so maybe what we should be thinking about is what's causing this trauma and how can we mitigate or lessen the trauma. Things are going to happen in life. You're going to have stress. Too much stress is traumatic, but how can we minimize the stress? And when we cannot, how can we help individuals to find good coping or healthy coping mechanisms? And I don't think we do enough of that. And some people might need different coping mechanisms based on their historical experiences, which ties back into some of the intersectionality that Chief Outlaw had brought up. There's no one size fits all, but we do know that trauma is not just experiencing something directly, right? It is also witnessing it. And that makes me think about when we look at things on the news and the repeated portrayal of certain situations, seeing someone that looks like you being choked out or being beaten up and abused, how does that make you feel? That can lead to any sort of reaction ranging from suicide to gun violence, to murder, to homicide. And again, both are violent, both are traumatic, and oftentimes both involve someone trying to escape their own trauma. And I think until we address this mental health component of how do we deal with trauma, we will continue to have the violence. And I want to say really quickly, it's not just the individuals in the community, but the law enforcement officers don't even realize that they're being traumatized as well. And so how they react, their first response is more likely to be one that induces more trauma while traumatizing themselves. So there's that issue of re-traumatization. But I'll leave it at that for now and sit back and listen to what others have to say and share as we go.
Dr. Tulloch, thank you very much. And you raised the issue of drug and drug addiction. Hopefully through the panel discussion, I can question you about what that means in practical terms. Are you advocating decriminalizing drugs? Are you advocating legalizing drugs? Like, how far do we go if we realize the addiction is a problem? And by the way, doctor, you were so impressive. I'm not going to complain about at the end, you said, I want to say really quickly, that kind of took you over the 3 minutes, but what you said really quickly was so thorough, I'm going to give you a pass. So great job. Let's keep things moving, but I'm not giving anybody else a pass. That's just for Dr. Tulloch. Next up, Samson Styles. And as I pointed out during the intro, he wears on his sleeve his experience. And one of the things that I love about what Samson can do is he can talk to young people that most of us on this panel can't talk to, because he's been there, he's done that. He's a real OG as far as they're concerned. Without further ado, Brother Samson Styles, your 3 minutes.
Thank you, brother. I really appreciate it, and I appreciate the panelists, and everyone that's tuned in. First of all, I'm going to say trauma and violence is as American as apple pie. America glorifies violence. Rather, they put their gangsters, that mass murderers, you know, they make stories about them and they glorify them. They put them up to be almost immortal, right? That's a sickness. We all dealing with that sickness. To even be able to glorify something that's detrimental is a sickness, right? So we all dealing with trauma, just being in America and participating in the normal activities. There's, to bring race into it, white people were going through a lot of violence back in the early 20s and the time of the Tommy guns and up into the 40s after World War II. And they found a way to almost eradicate that, right? And they did that by giving the GI Bill and having subsidized housing. They was moving them from these urban areas because then the blacks and a lot of the Jews and a lot of white immigrants was living together because they were all poor together, right? But they subsidized their white flight and they were able to create generational wealth from that flight. So we know the answers. We know that if that worked for them, it'll work for us, right? So not saying that that's what we want or we asking for a handout, but that's what was done in the past. So when Dr. Tulloch spoke about the history, it's very important that we know our history and know what happened before. Because when people say, oh, black on black crime, I'm like, well, Asian on Asian crime, Spanish on Spanish crime. More people they kill in the vicinity where they live at, right? It's from familiar encounters that causes this. Right? More white people are familiar with white people. Black people are more familiar with black people. But black people get the black eye when it comes to violence. And we have to be able to understand that this is not just a black thing, that this happened before, and that there was a solution before that worked. And we need to just recognize that. And I'm gonna just stop right there.
Samson, thank you very much. And I want to follow with you on that whole notion of black on black crime. I'm so glad you mentioned that because I kind of understand how other races might look from the outside at us and call it black on black, but it drives me crazy when I hear black people say black on black. As you pointed out, when Latinos attack Latinos, they don't call it brown on brown. When Asians attack Asians, they don't call it yellow on yellow. And certainly when white kids shoot up the high schools, they don't call it white on white. But when it comes to black people, it's a different thing. So I'm so glad you raised that. I'm also so glad we have from the Office of the Pennsylvania Attorney General, Anthony Luca. Anthony, I'm going to give you your 3-minute opening statement talking about crime and mental health and race and class or anything else you think is relevant. Without further ado, the microphone is yours, Anthony.
Thank you, Brother Coard. Thank you, Brother Jackson. And I want to thank all the brothers of Kappa Alpha Psi for your dedication and all of your hard work, both locally, nationally, as well as globally. It's both an honor and a pleasure to join you this evening on behalf of the Office of Pennsylvania Attorney General Josh Shapiro. Thank you for this unique discussion, part 2 of this unique discussion. Oftentimes when we're talking about issues of gun violence and the epidemic, we focus on the numbers. While the numbers are important, we have to understand that encompassed in the totality of those numbers are individuals, right? Individuals who whose families and friends and others have been impacted, communities that are being impacted on a daily basis. I think sometimes when we get caught in that rabbit hole of talking about the numbers, it also causes our focus to shift on looking for short-term solutions for what are long-term problems. When we talk about the epidemic didn't just start in 2021. It didn't start in 2020. Oftentimes when we talk about the numbers, we talk about whether or not this year's numbers are going to surpass last year's and whether last year's numbers surpass year before. So again, we need to focus on looking for long-term solutions, putting plans in place that are meeting individuals where they are. And when I talk about meeting individuals where they are, let's get even more nuanced. Meeting young people where they are, right? And when I talk about young people right now, when I say we in the collective sense, we're failing our young people. We have to meet our young people where they are. We have to meet our social service agencies where they are. We have to meet our community-based grassroots organizations where they are, our religious institutions where they are. But understand that encompassed in all of that are individuals who are hurting, individuals who are in pain. And when we're coming up with these systems and these plans of action, they have to be systems and plans of actions that are culturally competent, because at the end of the day, communication is everything. So when there is a wall that is being put up between many of us who are out here doing the work and the individuals that we are trying to connect with, then we're failing at what it is that we're doing. So ultimately, we need to continue to come together because we are better together than we are apart. We need to continue to make these connections. When we talk about the epidemic of gun violence, I essentially break it down into 3 different categories. There's an economic, a social, as well as environmental component that is all at play. And we need to make sure that we are putting systems in place that are designed to address all of those areas, both individually as well as collectively.
Anthony, I definitely want to follow with you because you broke that down very well, especially at the end. You talk about the 3 components: economic, social, and environment. And we want to expand upon that. Our final panelist in connection with the opening statement will be Brother Bilal. But before we hear from Brother Bilal, we have about an hour left in tonight's program. Time flies when you're having fun. We have the fraternity Kappa Alpha Psi. We got a list of questions emailed to us from the public. We got several questions in the chat. And what we're going to try to do is to spend as much time as we possibly can with that issue, with what the people want to know. Before that, Brother Bilal and his 3 minutes opening statement. Brother Bilal is muted.
I'm sorry. Good evening to everybody. I want to thank the Kappas and all the panelists tonight. I'm going to be very quick. My mark might not take 3 minutes. Number 1, institutional white racism is driving violence in the Black community. Whenever you lock out a group of people from participating in society, which institutional white racism does, all you got to do is look at all the indicators. Black males, Black community, 50% or more Black males are jobless. Education, we're dropping out of school way more than other race. Economically, the city just issued a report this week and saw the minority participation has dropped in the city of Philadelphia. And if you look at last year's report, we as Black businesses were only around 12 to 13% of doing businesses in the city. So when you constantly lock out a population from participating in society, then you're going to have an explosion. And that's what we're seeing now. And I know this might upset some folks, but I do use the term Black on Black crime because 85% or more Blacks are killing each other. But there's a reason for that. So quickly, what I would like to talk about today is not about what Outlaw's doing, it's not about what Krasner's doing, it's not about what the mayor's doing, it's about what we have to do as a Black community. One, we got to take ownership of this problem. When we took ownership of us killing each other in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s with gangs, the Black community was the one who solved that problem, bringing gang deaths from 80 to 90 per year to 1979 to 0, because we stepped up and took responsibility and ownership of that problem. Second thing we got to do collectively is talk about faith. We don't, as a people, our movements were always driven by faith. The Civil Rights Movement was driven by faith. The Black Power Movement was driven by faith. We lost the faith of our communities, and we got to talk about faith. And I don't care if you're Muslim, you're Christian, whatever the religion is, we got to talk about faith, because faith then leads to value. I talk to young men every week in the Juvenile Justice Center, and it sickens me when they say to me, they're not going to live beyond 25 or 26 years old, because they have no hope, they have no faith, they have no values. So the community has to step up. Every time Philadelphia's Black community has stepped up, we've been successful in resolving the problems, from getting Black mayors elected to Black city council folks elected to everything. We stepped up. I'm saying the Black community has to take ownership and step up and deal with this community, this problem about what's going on with violence. Also, doctor, it leads into the trauma. When you're constantly being put down because of your race, you feel less about yourself. Then that trauma is overflowing now. So part of us taking ownership, healing, loving each other is what we got to do to move forward.
Brother Bilal, we certainly appreciate your opening statement. I got to tell you though, if anybody else Black had said they used the phrase Black on Black, I'd be yelling and screaming, but you're Bilal and you're speaks for itself. So I dare not question that. I just give you a nod and keep it moving because of who you are and because of the work that you've done. We have at least, we had 12 to maybe 15 questions that were emailed to us previously. Right before this virtual panel discussion began, we got about maybe 10 more. I'm looking here in the chat, there's like 40. So one thing I can tell you, we won't get to all of them. We certainly won't. Big shout out to all the panelists, especially DA Larry Krasner and Commissioner Outlaw, because they're on the clock right now. They're actually working right now, and we appreciate that they allowed us to intrude upon their time to be here. And I say the same thing to each of you. You could be doing something else, but the fact that you're here, we appreciate that. Let's jump right into it because at 8 o'clock, we want to really get into the chat. Right now, we're going to go into the previously issued questions, and they range from how are guns getting into the hood? Are there any violence intervention plans? What are the courts and judges doing about gun violence? Fraternities and sororities, what are they doing? Is there a connection between gun violence and rap music? In addition, what are the authorities doing in connection with monitoring social media? I have to admit, I was completely out of the loop. I didn't know that a lot of the stuff that was going on in the hood started in social media. And I thought I was tuned in. I'd like to know from Commissioner Outlaw and DA Krasner, what are they doing in connection with monitoring social media? We also want to talk about more specifically mental health. So we're going to try to get into as much as we can with these questions. We're going to go to the chat around 8 o'clock. At the very end, I'm going to give each panelist a 2-minute closing statement. And in that closing statement, you have to give us a practical solution. None of that abstract stuff. I want to know, what is it that you have done, are doing, or will do concretely, specifically, and practically? Having said that, let's start off with the first question we got. How are the guns getting into the hood? And what's being done about it? Let's start with Police Commissioner Outlaw, then we'll follow up with DA Larry Krasner, and then hear from the other panelists who might know what's going on in the street. So Commissioner Outlaw, first question to you, and then to DA Larry Krasner. What's being done about how the guns are flooding the community? Because yeah, there's a lot of gun violence in the hood, but none of my clients, young Black men, manufacture guns. They get them from somewhere. So I'll let Commissioner Outlaw start and then DA Krasner follow up.
Sure, guns are readily accessible, very easy to obtain. I know there was some discussion either in our previous conversation or maybe even for tonight about straw purchasing. A lot of people think that guns here are coming from all over the country. In fact, what we're seeing and what we're learning from our partners with the ATF is that, quite frankly, a lot of the guns are here from within the state, and then maybe some from down in the Atlanta area or in Georgia or in Virginia. But for the most part, the guns come from here. We are also seeing an increased issue with what we call privately made firearms or ghost guns. And that's where you can go online and purchase components and even a kit of a firearm, which isn't illegal at all. But then you order all these things online and you put it together while you're at home, and then you use it, which makes it illegal. These guns are more dangerous because they're not traceable. They don't have any serial number. They're not serialized. And we're starting to see, although it's a little bit difficult for us to track, while we're recovering an increasing number of these guns off the street, we're also seeing that they're being used more and more in violent crimes, specifically our non-fatal shootings and our homicides. So it's very easy to purchase a gun. We are part of, and the DA or maybe, the AG's office can speak a little bit more. The police department is part of a gun violence task force, and where we work with our partners, where we focus solely on patterns or criminal enterprises relating to legally owned firearms, and then the cases are they're investigated and they're pushed forward to the AG for prosecution or to the DA's office. And like I said, either of them can talk more about that. But with that said, because we know that our young people more and more have access, again, they're very easy to get. We're doing what we can, not only solely on the enforcement end, because we are well on path to get a record number of illegal crime guns off the street, over 6,000 this year. We're doing what we can to ensure that we're either partnering or we're providing programming for our young people, whether it's around gun safety or through our PAL programs or partnering with our recreation centers to get that messaging out very early in schools to talk about gun safety and to just try to stay away from guns altogether. Our shooters are becoming younger and younger, and we're starting to see our victims become younger and younger as well.
Commissioner Outlaw, we certainly appreciate that. I want to ask a follow-up before we get to DA Larry Krasner. And also, because he's from the Attorney General's office, we want Anthony Luker to chime in, and then we'll get to the other panelists. But let me ask you this, and I'm going to ask the same thing to DA Krasner. And I'm going to give some examples of cases I have, but I'm going to change the facts to protect the anonymity and confidentiality. But I've had, I'd say, of the last 25 gun possession cases I've represented defendants for, I won maybe 15 of those 25 on suppression motions because it was an illegal search. And the problem with those illegal searches is that it, quote unquote, let the bad guys off. But everybody has a constitutional right. Very quickly, Commissioner Outlaw, what's being done to train police officers to do good searches so that lawyers like me don't come along and have a legal basis for a suppression motion? Very quickly, the last case I had, for whatever reason, the police pulled everybody out of the car, including the passenger. Yeah. The passenger runs away, they chase him, he ditches a gun, I file a suppression motion, and it's granted. So my question to you is, what's being done to train cops on good searches to catch the bad guys with the guns?
Exactly what you mentioned. So now that we're looking at it, I will say, I don't think, up until recent months, we weren't going back, well, I'll say December, we weren't going back and doing, I don't want to use the term post-mortem, but we weren't going back and looking at our cases to find out why we were losing cases or why evidence was being suppressed. And again, if there are patterns there, is it a misconduct issue? Or is this an overall training issue? And I think in a lot of the cases that we reviewed, we found that it was clearly a training issue. And so we're starting to see that more and more. And then obviously, because we are looking at this, and then we're also looking at, in these cases, does body worn camera align, the footage align with what was reported, right? We want to try to find these things before it becomes a problem or before it gets in your office or in your lab. So training is key. Identifying misconduct when it is misconduct and calling it for what it is and addressing it as misconduct. But I think what's really key for us is that we now have set up systems of accountability to ensure that these cases stick and we are getting the right people off the street.
Thank you, Commissioner. I'm going to throw that same question regarding where the guns are coming from and what's being done to stop them to DA Larry Krasner and then to Anthony Luker from the Attorney General's office. Mr. Krasner first.
Sure, thank you. And here I gotta go to bat for my colleague, Police Commissioner Outlaw. What a lot of people don't realize, first of all, Michael, you win all your cases. I mean, that's part of it. But a lot of people don't realize that there have been very significant changes in the law around search and seizure in Pennsylvania. Some of that law makes it much harder. It makes it much harder for two reasons. Police were trained one way and then the law changed. So even though they were following the law as it existed at the time, turns out those searches were no good. And then of course, it's a heavy burden on the police department to have 6,500 or so active cops and have to retrain them to all of a sudden get it right. That's a lot of training. So the police department is up against that. That is part of the problem. There's another case that's even more troubling, frankly, with which I strongly disagree, that basically says if you're standing out on the street and you pull out a gun and show it to people, the police do not have a right to do anything to you because you might have a permit. Well, see, here's what's wrong with that logic. In Philadelphia, there are very, very few permits compared to the number of guns. And the standard is supposed to be probable cause. That means when you're waving a gun in the street, you probably don't have a permit. They ought to at least be able to come up and say, yo, do you have a permit? But, we have a very conservative legislature. We have some statewide appellate court judges who are very conservative. And unfortunately, they are part of the culture of this country that has made it a country of guns more than people. And I say that because it is a numerical fact. There are literally more guns than human beings in the United States. And frankly, the rights of guns and gun owners seem to be held in higher esteem than the rights of people to be safe. And it's just sad, and it's an outrage, and it's an indication of how much terrible damage the NRA has done. Look at a country like modern Germany. You'll see the level of homicide in modern Germany, a country that frankly was famous historically for its blood and its violence. They only have about 1/9 of the number of homicides. They only have about 1/9 the number of people in jail. I'm talking about rates of people in jail. And they don't have guns everywhere. You know, there's a couple other smart things they do that we don't do. But it really is a tremendous challenge. I mean, think of the position of a police officer pulling over a car in a country where there's more guns than people. That is already a frightening situation. That never had to be. We did not have to have more guns than people. And then the guns become an excuse for the guns. I'm scared to go out. Why? There's so many guns. What am I going to do? Get a gun. Well, the NRA seems to have one answer for everything. Get a gun. Get a gun off your 3D printer. Get a plastic gun. Get a kit gun. Get a gun. I mean, that seems to be what it is. And there's no quick fix for that culture, because the fact is, if you stopped producing guns right now for the rest of time, the guns we already have on the street are mechanical devices. As long as you maintain them, they'll work for literally hundreds of years. We don't need to get more guns from the South or from somewhere else. We had plenty of guns 20 years ago to supply us with all kinds of murder and mayhem for all time. All right, well, I'll get off my soapbox right now, but I do think we have to be fair, and we have to be honest. Aside from your brilliance as an attorney, Mr. Coard, we have to be honest about what those challenges really are in trying to deal with gun searches. So, you know, the commissioner mentioned that they are on track to take more illegal guns off the street than probably ever in history, and that is commendable in many ways. But it is also a matter of statistics that have been presented by the AG's office and the PPD, that for the 6,000 guns that they will take off the street, there will be approximately 18 or 20,000 new guns sold in gun shops. Okay, so we're still losing. And it's not a poor reflection on the police. It's just reality. This country is so flooded in guns. We had a massive buy of guns during the pandemic. It was in the millions. And it was based on the ready availability and this sense of fear in the pandemic, just generalized fear that I might need a gun because who knows? Somebody might break into my house during a pandemic or break into my business. And guess what? One of the things we saw during the pandemic was this massive gun buy, and then we saw this massive amount of violence. So we are in fact up against a very, very challenging situation when even by taking a lot of guns off the street, we always have a higher number out there and they're going to function forever. It's a real challenge. Ghost guns is a situation that's getting worse and worse. You know, we have a case going right now, and I think PPD is working very hard, and the AG's office, the agents with the Attorney General who staff the investigative portion of the Gun Violence Task Force. Our attorneys in the DA's office do the prosecution, and the Gun Violence Task Force, they're all doing a pretty good job. They always have at trying to get at straw purchasing, which is often the manipulation of family members, many of them women, by people who have criminal records and can't get guns themselves. I think they do a good job with that. They're working hard on ghost guns, but you know, it's an incredibly problematic situation. You can go on the internet, you can buy all the parts necessary to put together a gun in your basement in about 10 minutes. And you can go right outside of Philadelphia to a gun show. You can walk in with $35,000 cash, and you can walk out with 120 kits to make 120 guns. You can probably finish making them overnight, and you can sell them the next day and make a hell of a big profit, selling them for about half the price of a normal gun. We all know what they're for. They aim for deer hunting. People want guns with no serial number for a very specific reason, and that's what they get used for. I mean, we have a prosecution right now in which we have someone who put together, I think we have the guns, and we also have someone who put together 12 of these kits, and it's apparent that the operation was way bigger than that, that's just what we got. So it is not surprising that we find them in the pockets of people who've been killed, that we find them on the ground next to where a killing has occurred. It's not surprising at all, and it's just one more tremendous failure of legislation and of our system to bring anything under control. You know, I don't understand a world where we allow something like that to occur and it's legal. These guns are legal. It's illegal to buy both kits. The only thing illegal is to put them together and then to sell them, or to put them together and possess them if you're otherwise prohibited from having a firearm. We have, you know, to a very, very large extent, and I will be quiet. I apologize, Michael, but I get a little fired up about this. To a very large extent, the problem we have is political. We can't get rid of legislators who care more about guns than people. And we can't get meaningful legislation. We are blocked on all sides all the time. And even in our investigations, often we are blocked because there are impediments to even finding out where a gun came from. We can't always find that out right away. Sometimes we can never find it out. Sometimes it takes months. We ought to be able to snap our fingers and find that kind of information out in the same way that police can go over the radio and see if you got a driver's license. That should be easy. But the NRA has done a very, very good job, and their paid off legislatures have done a very good job of making this a country that is more of guns than people. I'll tell you one thing that all of you can do as people who are on this call for a reason. You can get the right people elected. We can get a Democratic legislature in Pennsylvania. They might actually write some laws that are worth something. That would be a pretty good start.
Mr. Krasner, thank you very much for your comment. And because of Mr. Krasner, nobody else will have time to say anything else for the rest of the panel discussion. No, in all seriousness, we appreciate his passion in regard to that. And we want to hear that same kind of passion from each of the panelists. Let's quickly go to Anthony Luker to talk about that same issue, and then we'll get to the other panelists. But we want to be clear, our focus tonight is going to be on the mental health component. But let's right now deal with the questions that some folks reached out to us about, including the current question regarding the easy availability of guns. Mr. Luker, what's your response to that question?
Please forgive me as I was muted, so I do apologize. Brother Coard, thank you very much. There are a multitude of things at play here when we talk about how these illegal guns are being funneled into the communities, and especially the communities that they're disproportionately impacting by taking lives each and every day. Every gun, for the independent of ghost guns, right, starts out legal, and then a percentage of them are making their way into the illegal black market, if you will. As Commissioner Outlaw mentioned, our gun violence task force, which is a partnership that includes our local partners, is working very diligently each and every day in communities throughout the Commonwealth and in the city of Philadelphia in particular, to put every measure in place to eradicate these issues that we're posed with. Under the leadership of Attorney General Josh Shapiro, our agency was able to successfully develop the Track and Trace initiative, which is a collaborative, data-driven approach dedicated to tracing crime guns and decreasing gun trafficking as well as illegal transfers. So when we talk about the communities that these guns are impacting, you know, these communities are not communities where the guns are being manufactured. Our office is committed to stopping straw purchases by monitoring gun shows and gun dealers to prevent illegal guns from hitting the streets. We are also expanding our crime gun intelligence to target problematic dealers and observing open source media to stop conflict and solve crimes. So I'll leave it there, but I just wanted to sort of highlight all of the different elements that are currently at play through our agency, who is working very diligently to address this issue.
Anthony, thank you for that response to the question. And if we have more time, I want you to expand upon that Track and Trace initiative. That sounds like a practical solution. So we want to know a little bit more about that, but let's keep things moving. Let's go to Dr. Tulloch. If you want to chime in on where you believe the guns come from, or if you just want to jump into the mental health component, totally up to you.
Well, I want to say, regardless of where the gun comes from, the guns are here. And so what we have to think about is, what can we do now? What can we do to minimize the need to use those guns? Because there are people who have guns and never use them, right? So how can we reduce gun use? And I think it's very easy at the slightest stress, the slightest mental strain, to solve the problems with the gun. So again, I think addressing the trauma is the way to go. I'm most familiar with addiction. I'm most familiar with addiction models and how other places address addiction problems, right? The drugs are on the street. They're not going away. There's a glut. What do? You have interventions that are community-based to help when someone gets stopped by police and they have the drug on them, rather than throwing them in jail and now they have a record. It interferes with their ability to get a job later on, interferes with their housing. Rather than do that, they go to what's called a community court. Portugal has this model, and community court is not a criminal court. it's a sort of rehabilitation court where the community comes in. There's mental health services provided. If the person has economic issues, their basic economic needs that are met, that goes along with basic income. And they get drug counseling and all of those things that would help to reduce the need to use the drug. And as the demand for the drug falls, then eventually you stop getting as much drug flowing into that area. And I think that might be something that we can consider for gun and gun possession and the glut of guns in the community. That's just one approach that comes to mind based on addiction, because the gun's already here, right? You're not going to be able to get rid of all the guns that are already existing. Just minimize the need to use the guns, and that might eventually decrease the demand to buy more guns.
You know, Dr. Tulloch, I love the way you tied in addiction and mental health to this issue. So the fact that we were able to get you to join us in the panel definitely enhances the panel. I'm going to wrap up this topic by speaking with Bilal and Samson. And I'm so glad to have them to talk about what's going on with guns on the street. They know the people on the street because they're in the street, hands-on, front line. So let me start with you, Bilal. Guns coming from, and what can we do about it?
I'm sorry. Commissioner Outlaw actually stated, Pennsylvania is a source state for guns on the East Coast. Always has been. Krasner, DA Krasner talked about the state House and the state Senate, the bills. I mean, I walked to Harrisburg 15 years ago under the banner, Jobs Not Guns. And I was pushing for free gun legislation back there. Lost and stolen, background check, and 1 gun a month. None of those legislation bills got out of committee today, 15 years later. But that's the mindset of the legislator in the state of Pennsylvania. So the issue about guns, straw purchasing, Pennsylvania is the source state in the East Coast for guns. So we just got to understand that. But I like what the doctor said, and I will quickly say this. It's all about changing you. That's why I talked to you about ownership and values and stuff. It's all about changing our mindset of our people. I grew up in a house, my father was a hunter. 6 guns, rifles, 3 handguns. Me and my brother knew not to even go near those guns because of the values we grew up in my home, in our neighborhood, about ourselves and people around us and what we should do or what we shouldn't do. So I think we got to I really believe this, and I'm pushing it all night. We got to talk about ownership in the Black community, our faith and our values to really change this around. Brother Anthony talked about long-term solution. This is long-term solution. We're not going to see no overnight solution. Young folks all packed. When I go into and I'll use the example again, when I go into the Juvenile Justice Center, one of the questions I asked them, but I'm seeing 10 guys, these every week, how many of y'all had a gun in your hand in the last year? Every hand goes up. And I'm talking about young folks from 13 to 21. How many of y'all been shot at? Out of maybe 10, 5 and 6 have been shot at. Traumatized, doctor. So we know about the gun problem. Yes, I'm an advocate of, people know I can do the gun buyback, hopefully we get some of the guns out of the house that won't be used and if they get out in the streets and active crowd. So I think once again, Michael, we got to be talking about the long-term solutions. How do we build in our community, taking care of each other, changing the mental attitude and how we think about particularly young folks? I think that's what we got to really be, if we're serious about this discussion.
And we certainly are serious, and we appreciate your serious response. Before we hear from Samson, who might be the best, or certainly one of the best persons to deal with it, because he experienced that life as a juvenile and as an adult. going through the system. By the way, because we have 70 comments, 74 comments or questions in the chat, we certainly can't get through all of them, not even most of them. So if any of the panelists want to put their contact information in the chat, that would either be their website or their social media contact or a phone number. If there's any way that folks can reach out to your office in order to follow up with some of these questions and comments, we'd certainly appreciate it. So any panelists who want to put their contact information, public information, obviously, website information, social media information, phone number, so folks who are part of this discussion can contact you directly. Samson, tell us a little bit about your experience and what you heard and saw and felt with young people and guns.
Well, first, I'd like to say that, you know, I was a shooter. I grew up being a shooter, and I also got shot 5 times. I made a documentary with one of the guys that shot me as we reconciliated, and then went to juvenile detention centers and alternative.
So Samson, just so we're clear, the guy who shot you, you and he connected?
Yes, we connected. He wound up going back to jail. I even wrote a letter to help him get home from parole and also set up employment and stuff for him when he come home. So this is what needs to be seen in the community, right? So people know that about me. They know that, you know, my reputation from back in the days speak for itself, but yet I was able to, you know, reconcile our differences and put that away. And I almost died. It's not like I just got shot in the arm or anything like that. I got pieces of my lung missing. You know, I got shot 5 times. I slipped 3 times, lost like 7 liters of blood, or had to get 7 liters of blood, pardon me. And it was a serious situation. So, you know, to be able to come together and to go to these youth detention centers together and let them know our story, you know, it was very impactful and powerful, to them. And it showed me also, I stopped using a gun and stopped shooting people and started shooting them with a camera, right? Mm-hmm. So I had to pick up something, right? And this is something that the youth need. They need something. They need an outlet. You know, you can't tell them just put the guns down, because guess what? In England and in Britain, guess what they do? There's not that many guns, but they chopping people up with knives all day. That's what they do. A killer's gonna be a killer. How they say the guns don't kill people, people kill people, that's real. The gun can sit up there all day, nobody use it. Like you said, Brother Bilal, you knew not to touch that gun, right? So it's the mindset that's propelling this, right? So it's the trauma, right? It's the machoism, the things that you feel you can't let somebody get away with. I can't let somebody get away with that, you know? And just that mindset right there is detrimental. And that's trauma, right? So, you know, to be able, the young people are going through more trauma now than we came up with. The social media thing is something different. Like we used to have fights. If I lose, okay, I come back and fight another day. Or I could say, yo, you got that, man. I ain't even want no more of you, right? And that was it. Now they're putting it on social media. As soon as somebody fight, they got the cameras ready. They putting on, this person has to relive this butt whipping for the rest of his life, every day, right? So that's a lot of pressure. Again, that's trauma, right? He's traumatized from this one experience because how this social media thing is now, right? So now they have to do something to basically redeem themselves, right? So there's a lot going on as far as the mental issues that exist with our youth, and social media is definitely playing a big part of it. So we need cats like me that they call uncle, right? A lot of the young cats that's on the street doing dirt, they call me uncle off top, right? And they know I'm gonna give them some jewels to help them, right? But the main thing they want to know is how can they channel whatever it is to make money. They wanna make money. And if they're able to make money, trust me, a lot of that violence will stop. If they learn how to make money legally, a lot of that violence will stop. Until then, I really see it continuously perpetuated.
Brother Samson, very well said. And before we start with the next series of questions, by the way, time check, we got about 20 more minutes to deal with the panel. And then at 8:25, we're going to hear some closing comments from the organizers here of Cap Alpha Psi.
Hey, Michael, can I make a quick comment? That's
yes, please.
Samson said. He used the term uncle. For folks who don't know the streets, uncle is referring to a old head. They don't call us OGs. They don't call me OG. some of them do, but they call me uncle. Their OGs are the guys on the corner with them that are in their early 20s. Us old heads are now referred to as uncles. So when he made that term about, they called them uncle, I know people say, what the heck is he talking about? Because on the streets, old folks are known as uncles. Their OGs are known as the guys on the corner with them, like in their 20s or early 30s.
If they respect it, they're uncle. Other than that, they're old head. Oh, get that old head out of here, man. Get out of here with that. You know, they uncle, they respect you.
Very well said. I don't know anybody's age on the panel. I don't know Brother Bilal's age, but he's coming at us with the young stuff that's embarrassing the rest of the panelists. He's telling us what the young people in the hood are talking about. Very well said, Brother Bilal. Let's quickly jump to what Samson talked about regarding social media. Because social, you know, many of us, middle-aged and older, we look at this generation and say, we've never seen anything like them before. They're the worst in the world. Well, damn it, we would have been that if we had access to social media, if we had cell phones. We didn't have access to the pollution to the extent that they do today. So they're not worse than us. They just got the weapons we didn't have. If we did have them, we would have used them. I want each of you to spend no more than 90 seconds talking about social media. And when we get to Anthony and DA Krasner, Police Commissioner Outlaw, what are you all doing specifically regarding social media? Samson, you kicked it off regarding social media. What's the problem? What's going on? What's the solution? 90 seconds.
Sorry about that. Well, the problem with social media is that the negative imagery, we can't really do nothing about that, but that will have to be IG personally censoring certain stuff that goes up. Right, but then you have Snapchat, you have this one, you have that one, you know, and the young people find some place to go. And then you have music execs that's not even signing artists unless they part of a gang and they got beef with somebody. And this is what's selling it right now, right? So, you know, they putting flames to they putting, you know, wind to the fire on this. Right. So the thing that I would say again is that we have to find a way for these young people to become entrepreneurs or to give them jobs. They have to make money. They have to have something that they value so that they could have some importance other than getting into some nonsense that they don't belong in.
Samson, thank you. We're going to quickly jump to Brother Bilal in regard to social media. But when I get to Dr. Tulloch, I want to ask her to address social media, but also, is the issue of money and jobs the solution? I mean, if we simply give addicts and people with mental health problems a job and a career, will that resolve the problem for them? Or do we need something much more? We'll get to regarding that. Bilal, talk to us about social media in 90 seconds, because you go to the prisons, you go to the detention facilities.
No, social media has helped driving most of the shootings now with young folks.
Say that again.
Social media has helped driving most of the shootings with the young folks. You know, like the impact of what's going on in the South with the track music, what's going on in Chicago that with the rappers and all that Samson talked about, and even locally. What blows my mind quickly, because I know I ain't got 90 seconds, I don't know why we can't challenge the social media, the Facebooks, the Instagram folks, the Zuckerbergs, all of them. They shut down President Trump. Think about that. They shut down President Trump with his craziness on social media. Why can't we get those companies to shut down this madness that we're seeing across the country with social media?
Brother Bilal, very well said. Dr. Tulloch, I want you to talk about social media and tie into what Samson talked about, because it's one thing to be in a fight today and lose it and nobody knows about it. But then you have to relive that. Doesn't that affect you mentally that you lost that fight? Go ahead, Dr. Tulloch.
Social media is primarily used as a re-traumatizing engine. And so you get re-traumatized each time you're watching these things. On the flip side, I think any approach has to be multidimensional. So members of the community and those who are in power that claim they want to help has to push the companies to change what they allow, while at the same time community members have to push a different habit, a different way of using social media. So use social media, have social media influencers that make money for pushing positive messages, social influencers that make money for sharing mental health messages, mental health care, or what to do when you're in a crisis, what to do when A happens. You don't go pick up a gun and go out and get your enemy. Have, again, community mediation, right? And it could be community on the net. You know, it could be a social media based community. There are all sorts of groups on the internet that come together around particular topics. We should have ones within our community, right? Our community that's saying, okay, we're going to focus on building community. We're going to focus on building spirituality. We're going to focus on mental health. We're going to focus on making money in a healthy and legal way. And that's something we can do because social media exists. They're users. So those of us with that influence and with the savvy should be using social media in that way. And I say, for example, my students, my psychology students at Morgan, they have to tweet out, you know, positive messages every week. That's part of their assignments, you know, and have conversations, jump on Twitter threads and maybe correct some of those conversations and support each other in correcting those conversations so that becomes a dominant voice. Again, I'm all about what can we do now? Because it's there, it's being used negatively, but it doesn't have to be.
Before we hear from Anthony Luker of the Attorney General's office regarding this issue of social media, Dr. Tulloch, spend 60 seconds talking about social media and addiction. Because what I understand is that people who are addicts, they're discouraged from being around alcohol, discouraged from being around other drugs. How does that impact them in regard to social media?
And well, they're discouraged because just the brain and learning, those cues will trigger craving. But I'm also a pragmatist and realist, and I'll say it's not realistic to expect that someone is not going to encounter other people using alcohol or using drugs. What we need to do is teach people what to do when they encounter alcohol or is in that environment and they start having cravings. Hey, support is big. You're having cravings, call your support partner. That's sort of something that 12-step does. But when I worked at NIDA, one of the most successful study was, back then it was a while, giving people Palm Pilots. And when they started craving, they sent text or they had support members who would check in on them. You know, where are you now? How are you doing? How are you feeling? And just practical things that can be done when they encounter the drug and they start craving, because the cravings are going to happen. It's a biological thing, right? That's triggered by the cue in the environment.
Dr. Tulloch, thank you for tying in that whole addiction piece to the issue of social media. I'm now going to go to the three law enforcement officials. I'm going to talk to Anthony Luker, I'm going to talk to Larry Krasner and Police Commissioner Outlaw. What is it that your office is doing relative to the negative effect of social media? 90 seconds for Anthony Luker.
One of the most difficult battles to fight, Brother Michael, is the battle against social media. It moves faster than all these other elements that are at play that are trying to put a stop to all of this negative behavior. That being said, one of the most valued pieces of currency right now in the street community is street cred and clout. And individuals are willing to go to whatever length they have to in order to gain that. And that kind of currency ends up more often than not turning into some sort of monetary benefit. So in order for us to change that culture, that takes an all hands on deck approach. One of the things that we are doing through the Pennsylvania Office of Attorney General is we're going out to educate our young people. We have to start early. Early intervention is so key when it comes to addressing this. More often than not, these individuals, these young people are being given devices and they're not coming with instruction booklets, and they're relying on the adults who are in the same spaces as they are to guide them and to direct them and to set parameters and to set guidelines. One thing that I try to encourage parents to do regularly is just to check on, your child's habits, when they're using these devices. I know our children want privacy, they want independence, but at the same time, we still have to keep a watchful eye over what it is that they're doing and the kind of habits that they're creating in the online community. There are so many levels of toxicity that can present themselves online. And those levels of toxicity are ones that are tugging at our young people each and every day. These young people more often than not feel like they have the weight of the world on their shoulders. I'll end with this. I was out recently doing a discussion on straw purchasing, as well as on digital citizenship, which is one of our programs, two of our programs from the Attorney General's office. And I was doing it in a space with a number of at-risk youth who had recently experienced a shooting in their community. And to hear their feedback and them share with me, youth between the ages of roughly 13 and 17 years of age, that they had recently heard shots fired in their community, at a relatively early, time of the evening, and what type of impact that was having on their lives, and some of the discussions that they were seeing around that shooting taking place on social media, all of which they're being exposed to. And there's not a lot of follow-up conversations that are happening about the healing that is necessary that they can experience after being traumatized in that fashion.
Very well said. We're now going to turn it over to Larry Krasner and wrap it up with Police Commissioner Outlaw in connection with the issue of social media. And based on Mr. Krasner's passion, the last time we're giving him 89 seconds and we're giving Police Commissioner Outlaw 91 seconds.
It would take 60 seconds. So, I'll let the commissioner talk about some of the excellent work that her data team does in terms of trying to look at this. We do a bit of that as well with our gun violence task force, but needless to say, we are not equipped to take on an entire internet. I have to tell you, the more I listen, the more my thoughts are actually turning in the direction of what Dr. Ingrid Tulloch and Bilal Qayyum are talking about. We are a society that tried to get rid of alcohol, didn't work. Tried to get rid of drugs, didn't work. Trying to get rid of guns, doesn't work. And now we want to try to get rid of violence on Instagram. Not going to work. A lot of this just it's almost like a body trying to shed disease. There are all these terrible influences around us. And part of what we have to do is figure out a way to resist those influences. Exactly how? Well, maybe there are better coping mechanisms. I'll tell you one thing that we have done, and maybe you could all work on it with us, is we gathered some of the important social media influencers to talk to them about putting out a different message, maybe getting a grant to cover it. I would love to work on that with anybody who's here.
Mr. Krasner mentioned social media influencer. And for those who don't know what he's talking about, these are people who, for some inexplicable reason, for many of them, have an audience. And I've checked some of them out and I don't get it, but maybe it's not for me to get. But they have thousands and maybe hundreds of thousands of people listening. So we just got to meet people where they are. If somebody got 100,000 followers, then we need to connect with that person and have him, her, or them speak out on it. Commissioner Outlaw, what is the Philadelphia Police Department doing in connection with monitoring social media?
So without going too much into the weeds, I will just say this, and I'll piggyback on what others have said. And going back to your original question, I'm no psychologist, but I would bet my lunch money and say that there is an addiction to social media. There's an addiction to fear of missing out. People have become celebrities based off of TikTok or Instagram posts, models or whatever it is. So our young people are now seeing that, okay, I can find value or self-worth if I become famous on social media. It doesn't matter how I get famous. And then we're looking at our grown folks, and I'm guilty of it sometimes too. And, I go home, I watch positive movies. I watch Disney movies because I'm so tired of all the negative stuff, right? But you go on social media, you have adults airing out their marital problems or whatever it is, and people are drawn to that. psychologically that has to have an impact, right? Whether it's vicariously or whatever it is. I'm saying all of that to say in law enforcement, we have to adapt. It's not always fair, but we're constantly having to adapt to the changing political landscape or the technological landscape, the social environment, whatever it is. And so when we found that at the end of 2020, that one of the main drivers of our non-fatal shootings and homicides were these social media beefs, we beefed up our capacity as far as our intelligence analysts, making sure that they were monitoring. Again, we can't police the whole internet, but making sure that if there were people that we needed to focus on, or groups or individuals that we needed to focus on, they were paying attention to social media as well. And then also passing along that information to our detectives that are assigned at every division that are part of the gun violence task force. We knew we had to pay closer attention to that. We knew we had to offer additional training as it related to that, because it's not every cop, again, that can come off the street and say, oh, okay, let me start doing this for all the reasons that you said above. So we're paying attention more to it. But again, we can't be everywhere all the time. But we also recognize, and the DA has asked for this before, for a lot of these cases, if we can get their social media information, which is why we don't like to talk about a lot of this stuff, even though people still go out and put that stuff on there anyway, it can strengthen the case. So
very, very, very well said. And looking at the clock, it is 8:21, and we haven't even touched the surface of what it is we want to get into. There's at least 103 comments or questions in chat. I still got about 15 questions or comments that I haven't gotten into, but unfortunately, we're running out of time. I'm hoping that my beloved brothers of Kappa Alpha Psi Fraternity Incorporated are willing to do a part 3 sometime in the future so that we can expand upon this. Again, it's almost ending time, and we have to close out at 8:28, 8:29 with closing comments from our poll mark / president, Brother Damian Jackson. So let's do this. And it has to be 90 seconds. If you go beyond 90 seconds, I'm gonna have to cut off your mic. I want you in 90 seconds for each of you. We're going to go to, since we ended up with Commissioner Outlaw with the last question, we're going to go to Outlaw, Krasner, Luker, Dr. Tulloch, Brother Bilal, and Samson. And I want you in 90 seconds to talk about the youth component, what needs to be done, and add anything else you didn't get a chance to say tonight. And I know that's a whole lot for you to do in 90 seconds, but we got to stick to 90 seconds. Tie in what's being done regarding young people and anything else you want to add. The clock starts now. Outlaw, Krasner, Luker, Dr. Tulloch, Brother Bilal, and Samson. Commissioner Outlaw, youth and anything you want to add.
Sure. Again, at the end of 2020, we saw that we were missing a very important component, a very important voice at the table, and that was our young people. And I don't mean just bring them in the room and speak at them and give a whole bunch of speeches, but you'd be surprised. We're all surprised at some of the things that come of our young people's mouths. They know more about the stuff than we do, and they know when it's about to happen before we know it, or before it's even about to happen. So I rolled out a youth advisory commission a couple months ago, long time coming. So we have representation all throughout the city, young people here, and their role is to advise the police commissioner on a quarterly basis. And it's not just so they can vent and be heard, but it's for them to have an opportunity to provide their input on the services that we should be providing specifically for our young people, how we can best communicate, again, how we can adapt the services that we provide, but also give them a voice and a seat at the table. Heck, the table, they are the table, to not only empower them, but let them know that when I'm on my front porch in my rocking chair, these are our future leaders. We want to prepare them now. I also just wrap up by saying I not only appreciate this group that we have tonight, but I appreciate the ideas that's coming out, whether in the chat or just from the other panelists, because I think now, and when I first said it, when I first got here, people were like, oh gosh, here she go. There's this expectation of me to come here and turn water into wine like this. There's an acknowledgement now that there are so many determining factors that are leading to the causes of what we're seeing. And if we do not address the root causes of these issues, we'll be chasing our tails and talking about this same thing over and over again. Stop putting the weight on the world of any one individual in these groups. It's going to take a collective effort. It's going to be require a willingness from us as a community to say, you know what, we got to step up and take accountability for our own stuff, and also hold the police accountable as well, but be willing to collaborate and partner with us to make sure that we're on the right track. So I just wanted to say thank you, because I see the narrative changing and the willingness for people to come forward and say, what can I do? How can I help? And to me, I think that's a huge metric in showing that we're moving in the right direction.
Commissioner Outlaw, thank you very much. And by the way, during Commissioner Outlaw's commentary, enlightening commentary, somebody put in the chat that if there are questions or comments, continue to write them. And what we'll try to do as members of Kappa Alpha Psi fraternity, we'll try to direct those to each of the panelists. So hopefully they can get back to you in a matter of days, a couple of weeks, but please continue to post your questions and comments and we'll direct them to the pertinent folks. Mr. Krasner, what's being done regarding any youth initiative and what did you want to add tonight in your final 90 seconds that you didn't get a chance to talk about earlier?
So, you know, we actually did a number of community town halls and all the adults there said, why aren't you talking to kids? So we went and talked to younger people. And one thing sticks with me from that. We did a town hall in the Northwest at a mosque. And, you know, I found out in that town hall from some young people who actually have their lives together, they're doing well, they're headed for college, that their phones go off multiple times a day on different apps. And what they see is a killing, or it is the crime scene. And on one of these apps, if you pay an extra $10, they'll give you close-up pictures of the crime scene. These are kids who are doing well. These are not kids who are in a disastrous state, but they are in a cycle of this violence porn that is part of what's going on in the internet. And it does desensitize and it does traumatize and it is harmful. And that is a gloomy view, but I think it's worth saying because we need to understand it. But there was also a really optimistic thing that came out. It was some comments by the imam at that time who said, listen, I grew up with religious faith and with an intact family, and I listened to rap all the time. I love rap. Rap didn't turn me, you know, gangster. You know, I had some other things going on. So I do think there's an argument that what we see with youth and what we have to work with youth is for the ones who are picking up guns and shooting, they don't have anything else. They don't see a future. They don't have anything else. And so the influence coming off social media, maybe even coming off of music, has a much greater play in what they're doing. We have to give them something else. They have to see something else that they can do and they can be. And, you know, just as Mr. Stiles said, that's a whole different world.
Mr. Krasner, thank you very much. Let's now go to Anthony Luker. Talk to us about what the AG's office is doing regarding youth initiative and anything else you want to add that you didn't get a chance to in your final 90 seconds.
Sorry about that. Thank you, Brother Coard. One overarching word that I want to use to sum all this up as far as what I'm getting ready to share. Investment, investment, investment. Investment in community, investment in the people who reside in the communities that we are working in, that have been disproportionately marginalized and overlooked for a number of years, and convincing our young people that the most important investment they can make is in themselves. The work that we are doing that is directly impacting young people and engaging young people on a daily basis are the presentations that are designed for school-aged youth, both at elementary, middle, as well as the high school level. The other components that we are doing is we hosted a teen talk that traveled throughout the Commonwealth and included the Southeast region, where the Attorney General actually facilitated those discussions to get feedback from our young people about quality of life issues that they're battling on an everyday basis. And from that series came a report, and that report was made available to school districts throughout the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Another component that we have, and this is where I'll end, is a very robust Career Week initiative. We are going into our third year of Career Week, which involves a partnership with the School District of Philadelphia. We are identifying a number of at-risk youth throughout the city of Philadelphia and exposing them. Fortunately, and last year it was virtual just because of everything that we were dealing with as far as from the climate perspective. But it is designed to enable these young people to visit workspaces that they may not otherwise be privy to, shadow professional individuals, and the shadowing actually evolves into internships, as well as mentorships. So all of that is part of the robust investment that we have coming through the Office of Attorney General, and that is the kind of investment that we need to continue to make in our young people each and every day. And I'll close with this. When we talk about this epidemic, The times that we just experienced over the last calendar year have only further exacerbated what many of us have had to deal with, but especially when it comes to our young people, families being separated. With all of these moving parts, we need something that is comprehensive. We need a plan, and we need to work together.
Very, very well said. We want to hear what Dr. Tulloch has to say about the youth component. And also, I'm going to give you an extra 30 seconds to talk about whether or not social media is an addiction. Dr. Tulloch.
Thank you. I want to start by saying thank you, everyone, for having me. And I am strongly looking forward to continuing this conversation and implementing, working with everyone, community members, law enforcement, and everyone to implement some of the ideas that come out of this conversation. From a trauma-informed approach, when you're being trained in trauma treatment, you know, we first say you must take care of basic needs. You can't try to help someone who's starving. You have to feed them first. You can't then stop using the gun if they're hungry. So taking care of basic needs, and that takes investment, economic investment. Connection to resources is not only economic investment. So I love hearing investment, 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 but keep in mind, it's not just economic investment, but social community investment. And connection to those resources will take community members saying, hey, do you know you have these options? Identifying what those options are in support systems. And I use the example, I've worked with a community-based group here in Baltimore called Mentoring Mentors, and they take a unique approach. They use what's called an intergenerational near-peer mentoring process. So they start young. They start at the elementary school level, and they meet, and the elementary school students have middle school mentors. The middle school students have high school mentors. The high school students have college mentors. Morgan participates in that the Morgan psychology students serve as mentors for the high school students. And then professionals like myself serve as mentors for the college students. And so there's peer mentorship going on, yet they can see the next step and they can see the progress. Last year we had the first group that went through the whole process now, where we have some graduating from college. And that's it's a community effort. It's not just the professionals, it's not just the law enforcement, it's everyone, the youths themselves that come to the table and say what they need and say what they're traumatized by. And we start our discussions when we get a new cohort, it starts with talking about trauma, educating about trauma, educating them about the fact that the emotions that they're feeling, it is normal given the situation that they're facing. When we try to tell people, oh, you should only have positive emotions, that's not healthy because it's going to come out in some way. So we teach them to accept that they have negative emotions, but then find healthy ways to deal with them. And that's happening all through the cohorts from elementary to professional. I would love to see something like that in Philadelphia. We're trying to grow that more in Baltimore because our cohorts like I said, we've seen students graduating from college now. The high school students come into my lab because I have a lab and they see, oh, people look like me, they can do this. And I tell them, hey, I grew up in Brownsville, Brooklyn. Law enforcement folks should know Brownsville, Brooklyn. I grew up hearing those gunshots too. And we can get to where we want to be when we invest in ourselves and we accept others' willingness to invest in us. So trauma education and investment is the way to go.
Dr. Tulloch, thank you very much. We certainly appreciate you being a new panelist. We hope that you join us in the next one. By the way, before we wrap up with our final 180 seconds with Brother Bilal and Brother Samson, big shout out to the dog and to the cat that's been part of this panel discussion tonight. There was a dog barking in the background, which did not interfere at all. And I'm a dog lover, so whoever has the dog, you get extra credit for that. I also saw a cat in the DA's office, a wonderful, wonderful looking cat in the DA's office. So before we wrap things up, Brother Bilal and then Brother Samson, talk to us about the youth and anything else you want to add in your final 90 seconds. Bilal.
Yes, first of all, Dr. Tulloch, I know about the program in Baltimore. A friend of mine told me about that, so I would love to talk to you about that more. I don't know if you know Brother David Miller, does a lot of work in Baltimore in the schools and stuff. So he informed me about that program. But youth, the most important thing I want to say is communication. We have to start communicating with our young folks, particularly our young Black males. One of the things one of the community activists in the city who's done a lot of work around violence, I'm sure some of y'all know him, encouraged me over a year ago to do is every time I see a group of young men on the corner, I literally go talk to them. I just ask a question, how are y'all doing? They look at me, you know, they don't know who I am or what I am, but they look at me and say, I'm just asking you a question. I'm concerned about you, how you're doing. Most of the time, 99% of the response is always positive, is either Samson, thank you, old head, or thank you, for asking the question. So we got to communicate. We can't isolate ourselves from our young folks. We got to be communicating with our young folks on a daily basis and supporting all the positive programs out there. There are folks that are working with youth. We got to encourage and expand it. What we need is positive programs to now work with young folks to be on a massive scale. Scale them up. If you're serving 500, we want 5,000 youth served. If you're serving 5,000 youth, we want 50,000 youth served. That's what we got to do. In my last words, and I'm getting back to my earlier comment, I just believe we got to take ownership of this issue. We got to encourage our faith leadership to get involved from all the faiths in the city of Philadelphia. And I don't care what religion you are, you got to get involved because we got to put faith back in people's lives. Faith produces values and faith produces hope. Our young folks in particular don't have hope because they don't have any faith in themselves. We got to do everything in our possible power to increase the faith and values and ownership of this problem for us to really solve.
Brother Bilal, very, very well said. We're wrapping things up, our final 90 seconds with Samson. Samson, talk to us a little bit about the Youth Connection and add anything else you didn't get a chance to say in your final 90 seconds.
So I want to thank the Philadelphia Alumni Chapter Kappa Alpha Psi fraternity, first of all, and Attorney Michael Coard, you did your thing, brother, and all the dope panelists. I really appreciate y'all. The young people, you can look at, I don't like to, I mean, we're doing something with Mayor Faruq now, right? He took 5% of the police budget and he called it refunding the community. It didn't hurt the police. This is the first time that the police graduated with social workers. They paired them with social workers, right? And also, he gave 5% to help with anti-violence initiatives. So the one that's in charge of that, Keisha Yuri, she hired Jamila T. Davis, and she brought in a slew of people that was able to give resources, including myself. I teach them documentary filmmaking, script development content, and we develop a piece so that they could see what they're able to make off of their stories, to be able to tell tell their own narratives, right? And we have a mental health that's there to show the youth how to recognize triggers in their own peers, right? And it was so like, it was so amazing on how they adapted to that. And they was coming to those classes every day that was taught by Dr. Rios, right? And we have somebody else that's a master entrepreneur, and he's showing them, look, if you hustling in the streets, you could go to Alibaba, pick out something that you feel you could sell. One dude says lighters, because everybody he knows smokes weed or whatever. Okay, you could sell lighters for how much? It's 10 cents on Alibaba. You could buy them in a big case. How much you could sell them for on the street? Oh, I could sell them for $1 easy. What's your markup? You out there risking your life, selling drugs to maybe double your money selling drugs, right? And I know about that all too well. Now here you got a 90% markup, 10 cents you paying and you selling it for $1, right? So making them see that there's other ways to hustle. So they started getting on Alibaba. They was making shirts. They started their little lipstick lines and all this. This all happened this summer, and I filmed it. And we're gonna have a greater documentary that we putting together from it now. We have a short that's online now, and I could send you the link afterwards. But we also are doing a bigger piece on what they're doing now. So that 5% of the budget, it went to restoring the community socially, financially, academically. It gave them education. It showed them about, the trauma, how to recognize it, and it just lifted up the whole community esteem. And they was getting paid to do this, right? So instead of summer school, summer jobs, this is what they offered for the summer job program. So from people from 14 up until 25 years old were in this program, and even some adults we made exceptions for that was even older than that, right? So that's a start. So guess what? During those hours that they was learning, they wasn't on social media. Now they getting some homework to take home, and now and you piquing their interest. It's not like you just pushing stuff on them that they don't want to do. We have somebody that explained what a CDL license, how much truckers make, how you could get your own company, and just show them what they are able to do despite having a felony conviction, right? Because most of us have felony convictions that's in this program, and that's been successful. So now we're showing them, we're not just telling them not to do it. We say, no, look, here's a way that you can make it, and we're going to stick with you from beginning to end. And I applaud Mayor Ras Baraka for even taking that initiative. So that's what we're doing. And I'm from New York, Brooklyn. I grew up in Brownsville, from Brownsville Project, Rockaway and Dumont. Yo.
Hegemon, you lots.
And I grew up in pink houses as well, the notorious pink house project. So I had dual project residency, both notorious, and I made it out. And I'm doing a lot in Newark, New Jersey. I have contracts also in Brooklyn and in the Bronx, and we teaching the youth, and not only teaching them, we catering to their interests. If you're a hustler on the streets, you like making money, we showing you, look, you can hustle something else and make more money, right? But you have to put the time in, and then we have people that's there to walk them step by step. And so far, it's been working out.
I got to tell you, this panel is really, really impressive. I want to give a big shout out to DA Larry Krasner, Police Commissioner Danielle Outlaw, trauma-informed specialist and mental health expert and addictions expert, Dr. Ingrid Tulloch. Also, big shout out to the person you just heard from, filmmaker and street/hood guy, Samson Styles, certainly to Anthony Luker. From the Attorney General's office, he serves as education and outreach specialist in that office. And we can't forget our own local brother, Bilal. I want to thank you all. And finally, let me just say this: time flies when you're having fun. We had a whole bunch of fun enlightening the masses. If there are comments or questions that you want to get to the panelists, please include them in the chat. We'll forward them to those persons. In addition, panelists, if you haven't included your contact information, website, email address, phone number, social media, please do that. And I'm hoping that Kappa Alpha Psi Fraternity Incorporated has a part 3 so we can continue to do what we're doing. I know I'm going to forget some names. A big shout out to brothers Ahir Coney, to brother Devin Allen, to brother Luwembe Domingos, and I can't forget our pole mark / president, Damian Jackson Esquire, who will wrap things up right now.
Great conversation can lead to positive, effective change. And that's what we had here tonight. I want to thank all of our panelists for taking the time out of your busy schedules to be with us for part 2. Thank you for everybody who attended. Please stay safe. Have a great rest of your week on purpose. Good night.
Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Good night. We'll be in touch.